So I've got everything set up. I've got my D76 diluted 1:1. It's at 68 degrees, and so I know that that means 13 minutes in the developer. And then I've got stop bath and fixer all ready to go. It's important to have all that stuff ready to go so that you're able to just pour it. Don't think that you'll be able to get it out of the jugs and measure it and all that stuff. You want it in a nice, easy to pour container. And arrange it so that you're just going to be grabbing stuff in a reasonable order as you go. So what I like to use, I mean, that Digital Truth has an awfully nice app, but I just use a timer, you know, and so I'm just going to set this up, and as soon as I'm just going to pour in my chemicals, and it's going to be continuously counting down. You could also use a timer, you know, like a 13-minute timer, and then when that shuts off, you'd add your stop bath, but you need to be able to keep track of the time. Does that make sense? And without putting yucky chemical hands on your phone. So for that reason, I just sort of let it count down, and I pay attention to where I left off, and you know, if by the time I got the stop bath added, it was at the 13-minute and 30-second mark, well then I'll just go until 14 minutes and 30 seconds. Because the most crucial one is the developer. And after that, I mean, I'd rather keep my wet hands over here and leave my timer, whatever type of timer it is, alone. So we're going to go ahead and start. And in fact, what I might do is I'm going to take the lid off here. My timer's started, but I think I'm going to actually start at the 30-second mark because that's kind of even, and then I'll remember to end at actually 13 minutes and 30 seconds. And this way I just have my hands free and I'm ready to pour it right in. So as soon as I pour it in, I'm going to start agitating immediately. And I'm going to go ahead and start here. Just all the way in. So you see how you just want to pour it in as fast as you can, and then start agitating immediately. And notice the agitating is not crazy shaking up and down or swirling or spinning or any of those things. We're just going to go consistently. After 30 seconds, we're going to bang on the side of it and set it down and leave it alone until the next 30-second mark. The reason we do that is to kind of jar loose any little air bubbles that might be trapped in between those tight spirals of film that are rolled on the reel. I feel like I just talked through one of the 30-second marks, but we'll see. Maybe not. So whenever the timer goes to 30, the 30-second mark, or to the 00 mark, I'm going to pick up my tank and agitate it 2 times, just like you saw. It's what we call one agitation cycle, but it's 2 inversions of the tank. Here we go again. Over one time, over the other time, bang the air loose, set it down. Don't stand with it in your hand in between agitation cycles. You've got to remember that even though we can't see inside that tank, gravity is happening in there. And so if we hold it at a slight tilt, our film might not be covered completely by the chemistry. Those of you who've used the plastic tanks before and are doing this with the steel ones for the first time are probably appreciating, as I do, that my hands are absolutely dry. These lids really don't leak. I just love them. For some reason, the seal on the plastic ones, they're old. They get old, from being peeled off and put back on so much. So now I feel like I should be telling you a story or something. I can tell you, as we wait for our little agitation marks, some various little things about what's happening now with your film. Like I've mentioned, the developer is the most crucial step to your image forming on the film. Because remember, this is where the silver halides, which received light when your film was in the camera, they formed that latent image. And now it's this contact with the developer which is forming the visual image. Just like what we would be able to see if we were developing paper in a tray in the lab. And the difference, though, is like the paper in the lab, especially say the RC paper that we use, for instance, it has a developer actually kind of incorporated into the emulsion, and so that makes it very stable when it comes to timing and development. You've often heard me say in the darkroom, like, you know, if you lose track of how long, just make sure you at least had it in the developer for a minute, because you know, it's better too much than too little when it comes to RC. And that's kind of because of that incorporated developer. It just sort of, you know, comes up and it does what it does. You know, once it's complete, it's complete. Film progressively gets darker, you know, more robust image development, and it builds up more contrast, because basically it's starting with clear plastic emulsion. That can't get any lighter. But the silver keeps darkening. And so what you see is there are 4 factors that are going to control how your negatives react in this phase of the process. The time, obviously, we're paying careful attention to the time, because you got to remember, it's a chemical process. Little molecules are moving around, interacting with one another, doing their little thing. And what we know about temperature is that molecules speed up when it's warm, and they slow down when it's cool. Time, ooh, my timer's going to sleep, that's not a good feature. Time, obviously, molecules have more time to do what they're doing if you give them more time. I think that's an obvious one. So we've got time, we've got temperature. Dilution, obviously, if this was a more concentrated chemical, it would probably, speed up the development, right? So that's why you have to be careful when you're checking the chart as to what time you looked up. Is it based on the assumption that you're diluting the developer 1-to-1, or does it say stock? Because those are very different things. Stock is what we refer to in chemistry as just the way the chemistry is stored, and often it's diluted for use to create what we call, of course, a working solution. So I mentioned time, I mentioned temperature, I mentioned dilution. The 4th factor is agitation. What we're doing every time we pick up this tank and invert it is we're bringing fresh chemistry in contact with the surface of the film. It's something that you do in the lab as well. When you're developing a print in a tray, you slightly rock the tray a little bit, right? And that is for the same reason, that you're bringing fresh chemistry up where, you know, the film or the paper is sitting here in contact with the chemicals, and the chemicals are working and they're forming this little relationship and all, but they start to get exhausted, so you move fresh ones in to contact and it speeds up. So, to sum up all of that, there are 4 factors which are going to control how dark and contrasty or pale and flat your negatives turn out. And that's the time, the temperature, the agitation, and the dilution. So when you're looking at your film, after you've developed a roll, what you want to do is see how they work. You know, like if you're scanning your film, you probably want a little lower contrast in your negatives than if you're printing in the darkroom using, you know, the enlarger. So you might then sort of customize your developing process a little bit. it's variations of what we call the zone system of photography. Large format photographers like Ansel Adams, who developed the zone system per se, they develop their film one shot at a time, right? Or, it could be a group of them, but they can control who's in what group. And so if you went out and you developed, and you took a picture in really strong contrasty lighting situations or something, then maybe you would want kind of a flatter negative in order to get a good scan of the full range of values available in it. We've all tried to work with film scans where the highlights are just hopelessly bright, but then if you scan it darker, you lose detail in the shadows, etc., etc. Same with the darkroom. It's hard when your negatives have either too wide a range or too shallow a range. So what Adams and his compadres would do is they'd keep track, and they would actually consciously overexpose the film in a contrasty lighting situation, and then they would underdevelop it. And so what you get is film that had too much light, but then it got not enough development, and the result is a negative with lower contrast that still shows everything, because back when you overexposed it, you really did give those shadows a lot of light. It's just that then you didn't overdevelop to the point that the highlights got ridiculous. Trying to watch numbers fly by and think to clearly explain this to you, so this may or may not be useful. But I'm assuming that as we are doing this in real time, you're just sort of watching along, and when I pick up my tank, you pick up your tank, and you don't have to worry too much about it. If you've been watching your own timer at home, you might have found that I was a little off on some of those. That's okay. Just the more precise you can be, the better your film is going to come out. But again, it's analog, it's pretty tolerant, it's going to be close, I'm not trying to tell you to be sloppy, I'm just saying don't freak out. Don't let this be a really nervous thing that stresses you out and takes the fun away. I'm hoping that can feel like, somewhat of a perk of this compared to your experience with digital, is that, yeah, digital gives you that instant gratification, right? You can look at the back of the camera and you can know right then and there whether you exposed your image correctly or not. So film's perk, I think, is that we've all been there with digital devices when something was wrong, you don't know what it was, but you get nothing because of it. Because the digital device just can't do whatever it is you need it to do until you figure out what's wrong. It's an all or nothing thing in many, many cases. And so that's kind of a nice thing about analog is you'll get something. You might have to work a little harder in the darkroom if you mess up the roll. If you get talking to your friends and lose track of time and only hit every other agitation thing, yeah, your film's probably going to look a little weak, a little wimpy, and you might need to boost up the filter in the printing process and go for a little less time to keep it from becoming too dark a print. But, you learn as you go, and the more rolls you develop, the better you become at it. I think that temperature check is the thing that beginners most often kind of forget or blow off. You get excited to do your film and you're just like, pour the developer in, stick the water under, get the water from under the tap. So I think if you pay attention to that, you're going to find that really helps your results. So we're getting close. It's it's coming up on the 13-minute mark, and of course I poured this in for 13:30. Of course, there's some time involved. There's a little time lapse between getting the chemicals into the tank, getting the previous chemical out of the tank. And so what I'm going to do is actually prepare by taking my lid off, The D76 does go down the drain when you're done with it. So I'm just going to start some water. And now at, you could say 15 seconds before you're ready to pour in the next chemical, that you go ahead and pour the old one out. So in goes our stop bath. And we're just about right on time. It looks like it's sort of 13:35, but you know, again, the beauty of this is that we're done with the chemical that really needed us to be precise, right? The developer is the one that's controlling the image. As long as we stop it at the right place, we've done our job. Now all we're doing is we are removing that excess basic slippery developer from the surface of the film and acidifying that environment, and that's going to prolong the life of our fixer. So it's like I'm not going to say you can't go too long, it's an acid and it would start to bother your film, but you know, there we go, we're at 14:26, that seems fine to me. Let's pour out the stop bath. When I'm pouring, I try to keep my finger on the lid just in case. It's just kind of a habit. I have never, ever, ever had one of these fall off, but why not? I'm going to pause a little bit, there we go, and add this, and this way, on my timer, we'll be right about at the 15-minute mark when the fixer goes all the way in. And that's going to make an easy kind of math for figuring out how long we're in the fixer and what else we need to do. Notice that as I hustled to pour that stop bath out to get the fixer in, I poured my stop bath back into the container. This now I'll just set back out of the way, and when I'm cleaning up I'm going to pour it back into that jug, because until it turns blue, that stop bath is still good to go. It's got that nice indicator dye built into it that tells us when it's good or not. So fixer, we agitate for the first 45 seconds when we're in the fixer. Different manufacturers honestly recommend different agitation patterns. This is just what I always did, and it's recommended by Kodak, but come to think of it, I've got Ilford Film. They might have feelings about how long you're supposed to do what. But now we're going to leave it alone for the remainder part of that minute, and then during the second minute of the fixer, we're going to pick it up and agitate for like 15 seconds and then let it sit out the remainder of that. So this is the first time I've used my phone app, or my phone timer for this. Usually I just have a clock someplace. And a note to myself and a note that I would recommend to you is maybe set your screen so that it doesn't keep going asleep. I had that brilliant moment of telling you that we were going to do it this way so that you don't have to keep touching your phone with chemical hands and resetting, but if you keep having to wake up the screen, a fine bit of good it does. Sigh. Yeah, try to do a good thing. So fixer, we are looking for what is called the clearing time with our fixer. Clearing time is half of the time required to properly fix your film. So now, after 2 minutes, it's safe to check and see if the film is clear. I'm going to pour the fixer back into the container where I have it ready to go back in case the film's not clear. I'm going to actually take the whole lid off. That's safe to do right now. Maybe do it in the sink so if it comes flying off and flips fixer, it gets to do so in your sink where you can clean it up easily. And then I just sort of stick my pinky into the middle. And this is a good example of film that is clear. It's not milky or hazy anywhere. Let's see, I'm going to rinse it with water so I can bring it up close to the lens. Show you. I was sort of honestly hoping it would not be clear so that you could see what milky, cloudy, not clear film looks like, but See, it's got a little bit of purpleness to it, but basically it looks like camera negatives. That means it's clear. That does not mean it's fully fixed. Let that sink in as we're working. So hopefully you've had time to check your fix situation with your film. If your film is not clear, it's going to look sort of hazy, milky, and what that will mean is that you need to return your film to the fixer for 1 more minute and to check it. Since doing that, it's sort of hard to do this in real time at this point, right? Because I don't know what situation you're in. But the cool thing is you can pause the video and you could just, like, I'm going to pretend my film is not fixed. So I would just agitate for 15 seconds more, bang it, set it down, let it finish the rest of that minute out, and then check it. And if it's clear, then I'll proceed to the next step, which is to return it to the fixer for the amount of time it took to clear. And I'm sort of trying to think in my head logistically what makes the most sense for this video if you're doing it in real time along with me, which was our goal, of course. Maybe I should keep it short so that you can pause, refix, and then you can begin the video again. I think you're going to need to pause the video and restart either way. Because the second, when you return your film to the fix for the second half of the fixing, after it's cleared, how long it stays in there is going to depend on how long it took to clear. So twice the clearing time, that is how long you should fix your film. Me, it took me 2 minutes until it was clear, so I would put this back in the fixer, continuing that 15 seconds of agitation out of every minute. I would do that for just 2 more minutes, for a total then of 4 minutes fixing time from start to finish. You're not going to ruin it if you slightly overfix it, but if you underfix it, I hope you aren't too attached to those negatives. So you can see where you'd probably rather err. Too much fixing time, and if it really gets ridiculous, the fixer starts to get a little less discriminate and starts to kind of go after the silver that's actually forming your image. Oh, but 1 or 2 minutes long isn't going to hurt. I'm sure that's why, for instance, for the Digital Truth app, they set a fixing time of 5 minutes, and so if you're assuming that the person is starting with fresh fixer, that's great. I'm pausing that thought and I'll explain the rest in a minute. So I've made it through 2 additional minutes at this point. At least I think so with all that talking. Never, 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 never pour that fixer down the drain. That's really, really bad for our water systems, our environment, and it's really a big deal. Don't do it. When your fixer is exhausted, bring it to school. I will reclaim the old silver out of it so that it's safe to dispose of. I wasn't talking about what I was doing there, but hopefully you could see that I was just using regular water, filling the tank, and now I'm agitating. What we're doing is just rinsing off some fixer at this stage, and so now the timer's not really too much of an issue. Just remembering that fixer is pretty acidic, we want to get rid of it. Now, if you did not have permawash, this would kind of be the end of the process for you, and you would just be doing a lot of fill, agitate, dump, fill, agitate, dump. And in fact, there's a good progressive way to do it where you save water, you know, in the event that you don't have permawash, you still save water, because like you start with maybe filling it up and agitating and pouring it out for, you know, after 30 seconds. Then you fill and you agitate for a minute and you pour it out. Then you fill and you agitate for 2 minutes and you pour it out. So you can see you're extending the time and you're getting it cleaner and cleaner. Like the first one, it's like 30 seconds because there's so much in there already. So much fixer. You're just getting the worst of it off. And then you're doubling it and doubling it and doubling it. That's a nice way to wash it and be kind to your water consumption, as opposed to just like letting it run in the sink. But I do have permawash, and you probably have permawash, especially if you're working in the lab. So once you've rinsed it thoroughly, you can go ahead and add your permawash. Permawash is just going to act like soap. It's going to help make those processing chemicals a little more water soluble and help the water do its job. So just like washing your hands with soap, I mean, if you hung in there with just water for long enough, I suppose you could get your hands pretty clean. But the addition of soap is very handy, isn't it? Just ask the coronavirus. Too soon? I don't know. That was on the border of a dad joke. Every joke out of my mouth now, I evaluate whether it was a dad joke or not. So permawash, I think you can see, we're just going to agitate continuously for 2 minutes. And then we're going to go to a final wash, and we're going to hang our film up to dry, and then we're going to try to leave it alone so that the dust doesn't settle on it and stay there stuck forever. And it's going to be really hard to do that, but we're going to be strong and we're going to do that. Let's say you forgot that intermediate water wash step. Let's say you were just like, you had chemicals on the brain and you were like, stop, fix, permawash, and you pour in the permawash right away with no water. That's okay. It's just going to wear out your permawash stock a little faster because you put a lot of fixer into that permawash. Just like go for double the time in the permawash. In fact, now that I think about it, like I'm doing this just all off the top of my head here. Permawash, if you've done that pre-rinse, you only need to be in the permawash for 1 minute of continuous agitation. If you forgot to pre-rinse with the fixer, then you need 2 minutes in the permawash. So now I'm good. I've got all those chemical steps done, and I'm just going to be washing it. At this stage, I usually rinse the lid really, really thoroughly while I'm letting water fall into my tank. And then I'll just dump the tank out. If I didn't get chemicals all over this towel, I can leave the lid there to dry. If I use the towel to dry chemicals up, then don't put your lid right on there. So this is kind of my process. Is like I'll just start cleaning up at this point. I don't really need the timer, so I guess I could shut that off. And the big thing now is to use your brain and pour the right chemicals back into the right containers, please. It's not the end of the world if you pour things aren't going to blow up if you pour the stop bath into the fixer. They're both acids. But, they really won't be as effective when they're mixed. So don't do that. You should have a funnel, either because you bought one from just the auto parts store or that you had one in your kit. I don't, so I'm actually going to pour this back into this container, which has a little spout. But use a funnel. You're using chemicals that belong in a dark room in your house, you know, don't pour a stop bath on the rug. These aren't terribly dangerous chemicals, but you don't need to be staining up your living environment either. Rinse everything. You should rinse this so well that it doesn't smell like anything. That's why I had you guys get glass, not plastic. I mean, if this is clean enough, I'm not saying you should do it. I'm saying you should be comfortable thinking of doing it. Just kidding. Pretty sure that was a dad joke. Watch the bottom of your bottles. Make sure that if you see a ring, you're not putting them down elsewhere in the house. Swirl and dump this little guy. Move on to fixer. Pour that in there. You might be wondering why I'm using a loofah as a sponge. Because I grow them in my yard and they're free. And they actually work pretty well as a sponge. So if you need a loofah, I promise not to give you a loofah that was used for chemistry. Alright, Mr. Fixer jar is nice and clean. You can see this winds up being a pretty decent timing of your wash to just let it run. And finally, Mr. Permawash. If you're sort of stuck without a funnel like me and you're using another container to pour with, at this point it's not super ideal to be pouring Permawash into something that just had Fixer and Stop Bath in it, unless you really, really have rinsed it well. If you really rinsed it well, it should be fine. Okay. Sort of last minute label stuck on there because I needed it for the video. Alright, now, the next thing we need to do is think about drying the film. We would ideally find a place where there isn't going to be a lot of traffic from other people in your household for the next hour or two. And so what I do is I use the shower stall, and you know, central air blows a lot of dust. It really does. So one thing you can do to get rid of that dust is to run your shower hot, you know, hot water for a few minutes before you actually hang your film up there. That'll sort of lay the dust down. Sure, it'll humidify the environment a little bit, and therefore, I'm sure, slow down the process of your film's drying a little bit. But like I said, it'll knock down that dust. All right. All washed. Last step is to make sure your hands are really clean. Give your film a nice little rinse in distilled water that's not going to have any of those Thibodeau chemicals, or wherever you're from, chemicals. I'm actually going to wash my hands with soap. That's maybe a little extreme, but you know what? I'm doing it. I think the most common mistake that people make and find out they've got grubby stuff on their film is it came from their hands. Their film was clean. It was great. And then they reached in with dirty hands from cleaning up around their workspace, and the last thing that touched their film was whatever chemicals were on their hands. So take your film out. This is a little pesky here. There we go. And just shake off the excess. I save the water in the tank so I can dunk my hands in it, so that my hands don't even have water from the Thibodeau water supply. It's not actually that bad, really. Now, aiming you slightly differently. So this doesn't have any chemistry on it. It's fine to let it drip on your floor. It's just distilled water. To take your film off, you want to gently just pull and let it spin. See, I'm making sort of a little hub with my thumb and forefinger. And hold it up and out from your body. We don't want it slapping against your body and grabbing all the dust off your clothes. No offense, but in your film's opinion, your clothes are dusty. So here are my negatives. I'm sure you're really excited and you want to look at them and investigate every one of them. Think of your film as being kind of like a plate of Jell-O in a sawmill right now. There be dust in this environment. So just, hold on to the top, get your clothespin and clip it on the bottom. That's going to hold it out straight while it's drying. And then with your clean hand, 2 fingers, we're going to squeegee down just to remove the worst of the water. Just like that. And then we're going to hold it with 2 hands and bring it over and clip it to your pre-hung clip in your shower stall. You can hang it on whatever works. I just have like this old shoelace with a clothespin on it. But that's it. Now we leave it alone so that no dust is going to bother it while it's drying. You can check back periodically, but try to just leave it alone until it's dry.